Let's jump right in. I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are a soldier in the ancient world. It's the dead of night. You're fast asleep in your encampment, completely surrounded by thousands of your fellow men. You've got your weapons, your armor, and you're feeling pretty confident in the sheer size of your force, right? But suddenly, bam, the silence of the night just shatters. Blaring horns erupt from literally every single direction, screaming through the darkness all at once. You snap awake, and all you can see is this blinding ring of torches totally surrounding your camp. Your heart is pounding out of your chest, your brain frantically calculates the situation, and it tells you one terrifying thing. You are vastly outnumbered, completely surrounded, and it is game over. Panic rips through the camp like wildfire, and in the sheer, blinding chaos, your fellow soldiers actually start drawing their swords and fighting each other in the dark. Okay, so let's dive into this explainer because here is the massive, mind-bending twist to that whole story. That overwhelming, terrifying army that just surrounded you in the night? Yeah, it didn't exist. Actually, scratch that. There was an army, but there were only 300 men standing out there in the darkness. Just 300. Think about that impossible contrast for a second. You have just 300 guys on one side going up against a massive army of thousands on the other. By all normal laws of combat, those 300 men absolutely should have been wiped off the map. You were literally never in any actual physical danger from their swords. The enemy wasn't destroyed by superior weapons, better armor, or a larger force. No, they were entirely destroyed by their own catastrophizing minds. Which brings us to part one, the concept, the mind as a weapon. To really wrap our heads around this, we've got to turn to the fascinating work of Paul M.A. Linebarger. And listen, Linebarger wasn't just some academic sitting in a dusty library. This guy was a U.S. Army colonel who designed actual, real-world psychological operations during World War II. He literally wrote the military's textbook on the subject. He asks a seemingly simple yet deeply profound question. Exactly how long have human beings been weaponizing the mind? As he defines it, psychological warfare is warfare waged before, during, and after a conflict. Its primary target is not the physical body, but rather belief, morale, and human will. War, it turns out, isn't just about bullets, arrows, or bombs. The absolute ultimate, most efficient goal of any conflict is to make your enemy feel so completely defeated that you never even have to physically fight them. You bypass the armor entirely and go straight for the psychology. Let's move into part two. Gideon's 300 men. Let's look back at that crazy nighttime raid we started with. It was led by a commander named Gideon, roughly 3,000 years ago. Now, hopelessly outnumbered by the Midianite army, Gideon knew a direct physical fight would have been absolute suicide. So he had to get incredibly creative. He relied on what we can call the math of fear. Back in that specific era, military formations had a very standard rule. For every 100 soldiers in a unit, there was exactly one torchbearer and one horn carrier. Gideon knew the enemy's brain was totally hardwired to expect this rule. So what does he do? He gives every single one of his 300 men their own torch, hidden inside a clay jar, and their own horn. When they smashed the jars and blew those horns all at once, the Midianites woke up and just did the math. They saw 300 torches, and their panicked brains multiplied that by 100. In a split second, the reality of 300 men morphed into a terrifying, perceived force of 30,000 men. It's wild. They defeated themselves from the inside out just because of a simple calculation error driven by fear. Control what someone believes, and you control what they do. Gideon didn't need to magically change the physical reality of his army's size. He only needed to change the enemy's perception of it. This whole event stands as one of history's absolute clearest, most perfectly executed case studies of pure psychological warfare. All right, moving on to part three, the Mongol terror strategy. Let's fast forward about 2,000 years to see how this exact same concept scales up. We're going from a single nighttime raid into an entire civilization-conquering strategy. Now, history mostly remembers Genghis Khan and the Mongols for their intense physical brutality. But honestly, their empire was heavily built on psychological manipulation, and they deployed it with almost scientific, cold-blooded precision. I mean, before a single Mongol soldier even drew a sword or rode into view, they deployed these agents of influence. These agents would travel far ahead of the actual army, infiltrating towns and cities just to spread highly specific, calculated rumors. They'd casually talk about impossible troop numbers, describe neighboring cities that had already been burned to ash, and just hammer home the message that any attempt at resistance was entirely futile. So by the time the Mongol army actually showed up on the horizon, the defending cities were already half defeated in their own minds. Their morale was totally shattered before a siege even kicked off. And it gets even more fascinating. The Mongols actually adapted Gideon's old torch trick for the massive steppes of Asia. Think about the math here. At night, Genghis Khan would regularly order every single one of his soldiers to light 3 torches. 3. So notice how an actual force of 10,000 soldiers instantly triples its visual size to a perceived army of 30,000 to any watching enemy scouts. Because, again, they were automatically calculating the size of the force based on the lights. It's the exact same optical illusion designed to trigger the exact same biological panic, just used on a completely different continent. But then things escalate to a pretty horrific extreme under the later Mongol ruler, Tamerlane. When Tamerlane's forces captured the city of Delhi, he pulled off a psychological operation that was just devastatingly brutal. He ordered the construction of a massive pyramid outside the city walls. But here's the thing, it wasn't made of stone, it wasn't built out of captured treasure. It was constructed out of 90,000 human heads. I know, it's almost impossible to even picture. As incredibly chilling as that is, that gruesome pyramid served a very specific purpose. It delivered one singular, terrifying message: surrender or this is your future. He didn't need to hand out translated leaflets or give long diplomatic speeches. The visual alone delivered a psychological blow so severe that entire surrounding regions simply submitted. They just handed over their kingdoms without a single battle ever being fought. It was cold, deliberate savagery used specifically as a communication tool to conquer through pure terror. Which brings us to part 4, the pattern across history. So if we take a step back and really synthesize this, a stunning pattern emerges. From ancient Israel to medieval Asia, despite these vastly different cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, the underlying operational code is perfectly identical. And that's because of our shared biology. The goal is always to create a false perception that forces the enemy to feel weaker, outnumbered, or entirely doomed. It happens in 3 steps. First, you induce a baseline level of fear or anxiety. Second, you introduce something totally unfamiliar or unexpected, like hundreds of sudden horns, extra torches in the night, or terrifying rumors. And third, you just step back and let human nature do the heavy lifting. When our brains are afraid and encounter the unknown, we completely lose our ability to reason logically. We automatically catastrophize. We assume the absolute worst-case scenario. The psychological warrior doesn't even have to finish the job because your own panicked brain connects the dots for them. Now, let's move to how this builds into our modern reality, because honestly, this is where it gets incredibly relevant for all of us. This continuous process of manipulation, it definitely didn't die out with swords and sandals. It is operating every single day right now. These exact same mechanisms, exploiting fear, controlling perception, and creating these overwhelming impressions that don't match reality, these are the very tools driving modern advertising, political campaigns, and the algorithms of social media. The torches and horns? Yeah, they've just been replaced by smartphone notifications, clickbait headlines, and trending topics. The technology has evolved, for sure, but human psychology remains exactly the same. Which leaves us with one final, kind of haunting thought to wrap up this explainer. Since psychological warfare is this continuous process happening all around us, constantly targeting our beliefs and our morale, you really have to ask yourself, are you Gideon? Are you purposefully controlling your perception and understanding the actual reality of the landscape? Or are you the Midianite soldier waking up in the dark, reacting in blind panic to an illusion that somebody else created? Take a moment to think about the torches you might be reacting to in your own life today.